Welcome to the trial of Alex Murdaugh, the Endgame, the guilty verdict in this case. I'm Andrew Davis from WSAV in our simulcast with WCBD with Riley Benson.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, Andrew, this was a long 6-week process to get to this point. We reached it last night, and of course, sentencing coming down today. Alex Murdaugh getting 2 life sentences he has to serve consecutively.
Yeah, really interesting because by the time we went off the air last night, we were talking about how long would it be the jury it was out? How much longer would we have to wait to see what they found out? It turned out it was less than 3 hours before they went ahead and turned over and said guilty from last night. It was a shock to everybody here. We were actually on a Facebook Live and turned around, realized, got the word, and said, we need to go to the courtroom immediately.
Well, Andrew, we were talking with Sean Kent, who was on the show with us last night, and we were talking about a hung jury. We were talking about a dynamite charge. Well, we didn't get to either one of those, didn't need one of those. So, you know, obviously the jury asked for a monitor to review some of this evidence, and pretty quickly it sounds like 2 jurors maybe went in undecided and within an hour had made up their mind, and so of course we came back 3 hours later with the verdict.
Yeah, and less than 15 hours after that, right back again for sentencing this morning. Alex Murdaugh had very little to say on this one, but what he did say was the simple same refrain. Take a listen.
I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son Pawpaw.
I'll tell you what was interesting about that is no one spoke on either side, defense or prosecution, in this sentencing. They said simply that they asked the victims' advocates and they said we did not necessarily want to speak. And the family of Alec, maybe the surprise there, they didn't put Buster on the stand. They didn't put John Marvin on the stand, something to support their dad.
Well, even to counter that, we saw Philip Beach in the courtroom too. Father Mallory Beach we both thought that he might speak on behalf of the state, and he didn't. And no family from Maggie was in there. Her sister Marion was a witness in this. Didn't see her take the stand to kind of speak to that either. So there was certainly a shock, I think, for both of us not to hear anyone kind of speak either way, whether or not, you know, Alec was a good person or Alec should not be let out of jail.
And actually, Philip Beach, you speak about that. Our guest right now, Brian Etten from News Nation, the correspondent, you talked to Philip Beach earlier. They sat in the back row. They were there. While not directly involved in the murder case, they certainly had a vested interest in what went on.
Yeah, we talked to them when they came out of court, clearly very emotional with everything going on. I asked him if he felt any sort of peace with the verdict in light of his situation, and he said yes, he did feel peace, finally. I also asked him if he wanted the death penalty, if that would have made him feel better about things, and he said no comment, but clearly they felt a relief, I think, walking out of court today.
You know, to talk about the death penalty, I think you and I at least thought there was a moment where Judge Newman might be trying to push things in that direction. He kept talking about the death penalty and how his family has put people to death for much, not as worse things as what Alex Murdaugh had done here. And your reaction to that, I thought that was kind of an interesting direction that Judge Newman kind of went in.
It's really a different situation, though. You start to ask for death penalty, you have to go even farther with this jury, and it would be a question. It only took them 3 hours for this, but if you're asking for someone's death, I don't know whether they would have pushed forward on that.
Yeah, that was such a powerful moment, I thought, in court when the judge started talking about that and talking about the portraits on the wall and talked about how the Murdaugh family had the portraits over the years and how they had put people to death before. And like you mentioned, the fact that some of those people in the judge's mind had done less serious crimes than Alex Murdaugh. I thought that was really powerful. I was also struck that about 5 of the jurors were in the courtroom during the sentencing.
What
was it, 11?
11 of the 12
wow.
jurors were actually there. They were right behind us. We were there. We talked to a couple of them, and they didn't really want to talk. We've heard a couple on a couple different news shows so far, but really they're specific with their job. And they said, I said, did you even notice the people in the audience, in the gallery out there, or anybody else? And they said, no. We were very focused on what we were supposed to do, which was determine if he was guilty or not.
I just thought it was amazing that they came. I've never seen that before. And obviously, that's not a requirement for them to come. I think it just showed their dedication to the case, the fact that they wanted to be out here and sort of see things through. I was really struck by that.
You know, another interesting thing was Judge Newman really kind of came down hard on Alex Murdaugh for 10, 15 minutes, kind of going through that they worked with each other at some point previously, and that was not the Alex Murdaugh he had worked with, who he had known in the legal profession, and kind of describing him as a monster, I think was the exact word he used in there. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting too to hear that from Judge Newman.
Let's hear from Judge Newman himself, that talking about Alex Murdaugh being a monster.
And it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person.
hadn't really heard much from Judge Newman throughout the trial, obviously just objections, etc. He took his time to speak his mind in this case afterwards. Very interesting. I don't know if I've heard a judge go quite that far with his comments.
No, I've been so impressed with him. I mean, he was so measured throughout the trial, and today it did feel like he sort of just let loose in what he'd been thinking all along. It was interesting. There was someone on Twitter who commented, most of the comments on Twitter, I mean, people really, really liked the judge, and there was this one comment that I really thought was so true that said that he reminded them of a disappointed dad, because he didn't get angry and loud, but you could really tell what he was saying, and that he was really disappointed, I think, in Alec. They had known each other for so long. He said, your family was so beautiful, you basically had everything. And to see him diminish to where we are now, you could tell that really bothered the judge.
Another interesting point was it seemed like he gave him opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to confess, or to at least turn and say, I'm sorry to my friends, my family, for putting you in this position. And Alec really didn't budge. I mean, I think 2 or 3 times he said every time, I would never intentionally hurt either my wife or my son. I thought that was interesting too.
He's very specific with that, continuing on that aspect. Judge Newman did talk to him a couple times as well. We have, I believe sound on that, where Judge Newman talked to him a little bit more about what he was doing and how he basically was a liar.
Well, what tangle web we weave, what did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end?
I'll tell you, being here very early this morning, about 5 o'clock, there were people here at 3 o'clock in the morning to be in that courtroom for that sentencing. It's amazing. You're the national guy over here to give us that perspective, because we're local and we know what it's meant to us. The national has been exploding more and more seemingly as this has gone on.
Yeah, there was a couple that I met from Baltimore. They came here all the way from Baltimore. They flew in yesterday. They were there for the verdict in the courtroom, and then they were there today for the sentencing. And they say they just wanted to be there. I know locally people know the family. I think there's interest because of that. But nationally, I think people wanted to see if the justice system still worked for a rich guy with a lot of power. And I think a lot of people were doubting that it was actually going to come down to this, that they thought it would either be not guilty or a hung jury. And I think that made people all around the country and really the world really interested.
Yeah, that's interesting actually that Alan Wilson talked about that too when I was sitting down with him earlier, and said specifically about the people in power. I believe it's the first one of the sound bites we have from Alan Wilson and Creighton Waters talking about what this case means.
Thinking to myself, these jurors are sitting there. If my wife and son are brutally murdered 2 minutes after I leave the house, and I'm going to be saying, why didn't I stay? Why wasn't I there? If only. Yeah. And he never said that.
One thing I think the jury saw was nothing about his behavior was authentic, and then when they knew who he really was, and that really no one who thought that they were close to him really knew who he was, whether his family, his friends, his law partners. I think the lack of authenticity, the lack of true emotion there came through.
Ryan, I remember us on Twitter Spaces immediately, and you've got a lot of followers on Twitter, by the way. If you want to go to what's your Twitter handle, we go ahead and
just my name, Brian.
Just your name, there you go. But it was interesting doing Twitter Spaces before this all started and seeing that rise in numbers from people who were so interested in it and exactly what they were talking about, looking to go, well, South Carolina's not going to come through and do this. And Alan Wilson said, we feel like we did something right here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the interest grew throughout the trial over the last 6 weeks. There was interest in the beginning. I think when Alex Murdaugh took the stand, people around the country were gripped. I told you the other day, I was on a different story and everyone was talking about, they'd been glued to the testimony all day long, and then everyone was there for the verdict. But it's interesting, I actually wanted to ask you guys, being on the ground here, in the beginning covering this right after the murders, were people more hesitant to talk badly about the Murdaughs? It feels like the whole vibe has changed. Now people feel like they are free to talk about how they feel about things.
I remember trying to get interviews with just random people on the street in Hampton, and that was like the toughest thing. Nobody wanted to talk. I think at points I was told I needed to get out of town because obviously nobody really wanted to go against the Murdaugh family, and at that point I don't think, Alec hadn't been arrested for anything, so it still was out, roaming the streets. So I think people really didn't want to go against that family.
Yeah, the power is something that has certainly diminished, and you look at the law firms too. I think you're looking at a situation where his brother Randy didn't even show up in court today and didn't show up for much of the trial. I wonder if that's got something to do with some of the money that, I mean, they're shelled out close to $10 million from that law firm to make up, and they're not done, making up for all these people who he stole from. And you saw Mark Ball on the stand, and the fact that he seemed angry about Ronnie Crosby, the back and forth with Jim Griffin on that one too. So yeah, right now the town is a little more open than it was, but it's still not perfect. I mean, those jurors had to be locked in and no names for a reason because they were afraid somebody could get to them still.
So interesting. Well, Brian, I want to ask you, because obviously there's more to come in this, but from a national perspective, do you think people stay interested in hearing about the financial crimes and the boat crash civil case? I mean, do you think this stays a national story, or do you think this part of the case puts it kind of to bed as far as that goes?
I think it stays a national story. I mean, there's already talk about a second Netflix series. I think people want to know more, and they feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg with this family. Of course, there has to be proof and things have to come out. I don't know so much about the financial crimes. I think people realize that already. But in terms of some of these other deaths that are still under investigation and there's still questions about what happened, I think people are in it for the long haul now.
Yeah, it's really interesting that Netflix series came up during this as a problem for the defense too. They didn't like that at all. Yeah. And the HBO series, of course, Jim Griffin was put on that and said, well, you probably shouldn't have done that before the trial either. Yeah. Very interesting.
Certainly, just the amount of attention, I think the interest and everything. Everybody, I mean, it's the story that everybody's talking about, right? Whether you're in South Carolina or you're across the country, it's certainly been an interesting thing to follow the last 18 months.
And Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We know you have to go back and talk more about this story to your audience on News Nation. So watch News Nation, Banfield, Cuomo, and during the day, also on Rush Hour too.
We'll be all over it tonight.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
we're going to go to break for now. We got much more for you, more sound from today, more analysis, exactly what happened in the trial of Alex Murdaugh, Endgame, the guilty verdict.
And what's next for Alex Murdaugh.
Absolutely. Andrew Davis here for Riley Benson. We'll be right back.
welcome back into the Alex Murdaugh trial Endgame. Andrew Davis from WSAV, Riley Benson, WCBD in Charleston. Andrew, we have breaking news.
Absolutely. We were talking about it before that Alex Murdaugh was headed to prison, to that Kirkland Correctional Facility for basically intake is all it is. And now we have a look at Alex Murdaugh the first time since he's left court.
So his new mugshot. Andrew, let's talk about this because we knew he would go to Kirkland in Columbia. He has to be shaved. He has to have a lice bath. I mean, he's treated like an inmate now. He's in the state's custody, the state's possession. I mean, he's got to go through all these different things. He'll be there for 45 days as they kind of evaluate his mental state, his educational background, the crimes that he's now convicted of committing before they decide where he will serve his life sentence in South Carolina.
It's striking to see. I mean, you know it was coming, but still to see him with that shaved head, with that moment of he is an absolute inmate. It's like when he walked in the court in the brown jumpsuit. While we've seen him in jumpsuits before, this felt different.
You know, let's just talk about this really quickly before we move on. I mean, think back to the boat crash in 2019, and you covered this, but Paul Murdaugh was never put into a jumpsuit when he was arrested. He was allowed to be taken picture basically in a suit like this, was never booked. I mean, so to now be at the point, Alex Murdaugh is in a state correctional facility as just an inmate.
It's something you almost didn't see, and then you look at it like Alan Wilson talking about, like Creighton Waters talking about how much that means to the state of South Carolina in general to have this moment and to realize they do have this. They can go ahead and put these people who have this much power behind bars is significant.
Well, Andrew, we also heard from the defense attorneys today talking about after the sentencing came down, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin outside talking about just the course of this trial, saying they really wouldn't have changed anything, that they basically said they had to put Alec on the stand as part of this because of what had happened with the financial crimes. But let's talk about the fact that, you know, they don't think that the state proved Alex Murdaugh was a murderer. And so Jim Griffin kind of talked about that. We want you to take a listen to Jim Griffin earlier today.
The family came to trial every day for 6 weeks expecting to hear proof positive that he killed Maggie and Paul, something that they had not heard before. After 6 weeks of trial, they came away more convinced that he did not do this.
Well, and Jim went on to talk about the fact simply that we could have done this trial as a Netflix series or an HBO series because that's what they put in there in his mind instead of that, which is also a little bit, well, it is for the man who was on the HBO series, which was referenced during the trial, and everybody questioned why Jim Griffin is on a TV series before the trial of his client, and some people went back and say that hurt them significantly, even if the jury saw it or didn't.
Well, you know, you talk about the interviews that Alec did with law enforcement, doubling down on this lie. Well, Jim Griffin went on HBO and basically did the same. He went behind Alec and said he was never at the scene, he was taking a nap. You know, that really probably did not help Alex Murdaugh in the long run.
No, absolutely not. Dick Harpootlian went the other direction with it, which I think is going to be their full appeal, talking to all the lawyers, saying specifically enough, the problem is the financial crimes. They should have never been let in this trial as a motive or otherwise, and they really only did one financial crimes issue, and it turned into opening the door for everything. So Dick Harpootlian brought that up during his news conference today.
They won this case the day the judge bought into letting them put every piece of, stealing from kids who lost their mother, from somebody with pancreatic cancer, somebody that's a paraplegic. I mean, all of that 2.5 weeks, by the time they got done with it, it didn't matter about final argument. It didn't matter about what we put up. They would never, ever, ever acquit him after that.
That really was powerful to me.
There was some defiance in what Dick had to say, and Jim, and really the whole team. It's interesting. Defense is never going to say my client was guilty to begin with and this never should have happened, but they were pretty defiant and pretty ready, saying 10 days from now they're going to file that appeal.
Well, I think everyone kind of expected that process was already underway, after the verdict last night. But even throughout the trial, there was points where they were very defiant. I mean, you talk about Phil Barber questioning of Mark Tinsley early on. That was kind of testy between the two of them. There was points where, Dick was going after Dr. Reimer, who did the pathology and was involved in the autopsy. So, today's certainly testy, but really that was points throughout this trial, something that was, I think, very apparent.
Well, I think you and I both know from being in that courtroom, it was sort of a stunned silence to much of what they did. That they sat there and no one said a word, media or otherwise. From last night into tonight, it really rolled right over because I think everybody is still almost in shock that it took 3 hours for the jury to do anything. And then came back today, and it was less than 15 hours from this started, and Alex on his way to a maximum security prison.
I think just the overall feel inside the courtroom last night, this morning, was just very heavy, very intense, very, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just very almost like, not sickening feeling, but it was just very odd and made you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Interesting, the only person who sort of get past that would be Judge Newman himself, who's become sort of the darling of everything. He was taking selfies apparently at various times during when he was walking around, even today when we're here. So Judge Newman did his part, and he came out today and did about 12 minutes of just direct at Alec about the trial itself and what he did and who he belonged to and everything there. I think what was interesting is he even brought back some of Alec's own words, that tangled web we weave, to talk directly to him.
Well, what tangle web we weave, what did you mean by that?
It meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end?
And obviously, Andrew, we're getting ready to wrap this thing up, putting a kind of a bow on the 6 weeks we've been here. But really, something that stood out to me today, Judge Newman saying that he was almost heartbroken about the fall from grace that Alex Murdaugh has taken. And we talked on this with Brian, but he had practiced law in front of Judge Newman, and now he's sentencing him to basically life in prison until his natural life is over.
Brought up what I had brought up even before this trial started, of just the amazement of the factor you had to pull his grandfather's picture off the wall of the courthouse because his grandson was up for a murder charge. They're going to put that back up there, but it becomes almost a conversation piece or just a weird thing to have that picture there and realize how far this family has fallen, how far this entire dynasty as it was fell.
And Andrew, it's really not over yet. I mean, you're looking at 99 financial charges. You're looking at the civil case for the Beach family. I mean, you're looking at the roadside shooting that's still in play, maybe possible drug stuff being investigated. I mean, that fall might not be over.
Yeah, well, and Connor Cook still got, I mean, there are multiple people from that boat crash, and Parker's is still involved. So you've got a lot more to go with on this, which will be very interesting to see how long this will last. And as you said, how many people are truly going to be interested now that he's behind bars.
Andrew, 6 weeks, 81 witnesses, 1,000 pieces of evidence. We started and we were wearing hats and gloves and heavy coats, and now it's 80 degrees. I mean, just looking back at the last 6 weeks, I don't know what to say.
It's hard to put it into words, although we've tried many, many times so far.
Yeah.
We thank you so much for joining us here on WCBD and WSAV for our simulcast during these times, during the trial of Alex Murdaugh Endgame. We appreciate you watching everything that we're doing today and beyond, and we promise to give you all the news other than Murdaugh as well, too.
And there's certainly more to come, too. Like you said, there's months and months yet of this to come. Yep. You can count on us to bring you the very latest as we work together on this case.
Nice job working that in. For Riley Benson, I'm Andrew Davis. Thanks so much for joining us.